When I found a hidden tube of lube under my husband's car seat, I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. After 23 years of marriage, the silence in my chest was louder than any outburst. Instead, I slipped the tube into my pocket, drove to the hardware store, and bought something far stronger industrial glue. That night, while he hummed in the shower like a teenager in love, I refilled the tube and slid it back where I'd found it. The next morning, I smiled, picked up his mother for brunch, and waited for the scene that would shatter him. I'll never forget the first time I realized my marriage had grown quiet in all the wrong ways. The kind of quiet that isn't comfortable, like the hush after a storm, but heavy, suffocating silence that settles in your chest. My name is Elena. I'm 47, and for more than 2 decades, I thought I knew the man I married. Vincent wasn't just my husband, he was my partner, the one who used to make me laugh in crowded grocery store aisles, the one who held my hand during long road trips through the Arizona desert. But lately, the warmth in his touch had been replaced by perfunctory gestures, a forehead kiss that felt like an afterthought, a love you tossed out like spare change. On the surface, we looked like any other suburban couple. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom ranch near Camelback Mountain, the kind of neighborhood where every driveway had the same beige pickup and every lawn was clipped down to HOA standards. I worked in human resources at Brightrise Systems, handling employee benefits and safety protocols. My job was steady, predictable, the kind of work that required patience and detail. Vincent, on the other hand, thrived on energy. At 52, he was still a personal trainer at Sundale Fitness. He loved the rush of being surrounded by younger bodies chasing new versions of themselves, and he carried himself like he was still 30. That combination, the calm HR manager and the charismatic gym trainer, worked for years, until it didn't. Looking back, I can see the trail of small fractures that built up over time. The new workout clothes that appeared without warning, the extra laundry cycles as if sweat carried secrets, the way his phone suddenly became an appendage he guarded like state secrets. But the cruelest fracture wasn't even the late nights or the perfume that wasn't mine. It was how easily he dismissed me whenever I asked questions. He made me feel crazy controlling, as though my concern was the problem, not his lies. That's when I started to realize the man who once made me feel like the only person in the room now looked through me as though I were already gone. The strange thing about betrayal is how ordinary the days around it look. I still brewed coffee every morning at 8. I still drove to work under the scorching Phoenix sun, the heat waves rising off the asphalt. I still clipped coupons for groceries, still watered the bougainvillea by the front porch. It's the ordinariness that cuts deepest life humming along, like nothing has changed, while underneath everything is rotting. I'd stand at the sink washing dishes, staring at Vincent's empty chair at the table, and wonder if this was how erosion worked slowly, invisibly, until one day the canyon is too wide to cross. The lube under his truck seat wasn't the first sign, but it was the undeniable one. Still before that discovery, there had been weeks of doubt. I'd sit across from him at dinner, listening to his stories about a client named Kylie, 23, dedicated, really focused on her goals. I'd nod, chew my food, and smile politely, while inside me, something tightened. I'd been secure once, proud even that my husband turned heads at the gym. But security becomes a thin blanket when you're freezing. I started scrolling through Instagram late at night, searching her name, seeing her gym selfies, her coy captions, and the shadow of Vincent's hand steadying her form. The proof was right there, but he still swore I was imagining things. At first, I told myself maybe this was just midlife restlessness. Maybe if I tried harder, cooked nicer dinners, dressed up, more often laughed at his tired jokes, he'd come back to me. But betrayal doesn't loosen its grip once it's taken hold. Each late night, home each shower that ran too long, each bottle of protein powder he stacked in the pantry, it all screamed louder than any confession could. And yet in the thick of it, I still wanted to believe we could patch it together. I wanted to believe I wasn't about to become one more discarded wife in a gym trainer's cliché story. There was one person who kept me anchored, Doris, his mother. At 74, she was sharper than most people my age, and she had always treated me with warmth Vincent rarely deserved. She'd call me up just to ask if I'd eaten lunch or if I wanted to come over and help her rearrange her plants. In a world where my marriage felt like shifting sand, Doris was solid ground. She noticed things too, the distracted look in Vincent's eyes, the way he never sat still anymore. "He's restless," she'd say, stirring her tea, her eyes narrowing like she could see right through her son. "Just be careful, Elena." Her voice was both warning and comfort. I clung to those little lifelines of normalcy even as suspicion wrapped itself tighter around me. I baked banana bread one Sunday morning, the scent filling our kitchen, trying to summon a memory of when that smell meant home. Vincent breezed in, kissed my head, and said he was off to help a client stretch. He was gone before the bread even cooled, and I stood there alone staring at 2 empty plates. The house felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath along with me. It's strange, isn't it? How you can live beside someone for years and still wake up one morning realizing you no longer know them. That's the setup of my story, the calm before the storm, the little details of an ordinary life crumbling into something extraordinary, something vengeful. Because the truth is, the night I slid that glue-filled tube back under his seat, I wasn't just responding to betrayal. I was rewriting the ending of a story he thought he controlled. The weeks leading up to my discovery had been a slow burn, the kind of tension you can't see but feel in your bones. Vincent worked late on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, always those nights. He'd come home around 10 hair, still damp from a shower at the gym, smelling faintly of cologne I hadn't bought. He'd toss his keys on the counter and mumble something about a client pushing herself hard, dedicated, you know how it is. I'd nod, biting my tongue until the taste of blood almost drowned out the bitterness. But inside, I was unraveling. Every detail felt like a breadcrumb, leading me toward a truth I didn't want to face. The protein shakes lined up like soldiers in our pantry, the new workout gear folded neatly in drawers, his sudden obsession with trimming his beard just right. Even his laugh had changed lighter, almost boyish when he spoke on the phone late at night, pacing the backyard pretending he was handling scheduling conflicts. One evening, I stood at the window, the desert night pressing in, heavy and warm, listening to him chuckle into the phone. "That's perfect, baby. Hold that position for me." My stomach clenched so tight I had to grip the counter to steady myself. He had never called me baby, not once in 23 years. That word wasn't meant for me. I didn't sleep much after that. Instead, I turned detective. My HR instincts, the same ones that helped me spot liars in interviews, sharpened into weapons. I scrolled Kylie Morrison's Instagram with cold precision, piecing together his absences with her posts. Videos of her stretching her back arched in ways that looked more like performance than fitness, Vincent's hands guiding her waist. His laugh in the background, the same laugh I used to think belonged only to me. The timestamps matched perfectly with his supposed late-night clients. Still, I kept quiet. Rage is loud, but revenge requires silence. I started watching him with new eyes, cataloging every move. The way he hummed when he was happy, the way he guarded his phone like it contained state secrets, the way he tried to make me feel paranoid as if gaslighting me would erase the perfume on his shirt. Each detail stacked higher a wall I couldn't climb, but knew I had to bring down. The turning point came on a sweltering Friday evening. Vincent had rushed out earlier than usual, claiming an emergency session. The house was too still without him, the air conditioner groaning against the heat. I wandered into the garage, restless, and that's when I saw it. His truck door hung slightly open like an invitation. My pulse quickened. I slid into the driver's seat, the leather sticky from the day's sun, and searched. Under the seat, my fingers brushed against something slick, cylindrical. When I pulled it into the dim light, the truth stared back at me, a tube of lubricant. Expensive, sleek packaging, definitely not ours. My breath caught, but not in shock. It was confirmation, cold and absolute. He hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, he had an entire secret life I'd been financing with my silence. For a long minute, I sat frozen in the garage, buzzing with cicadas outside my heart, pounding like a war drum. Then slowly, a different rhythm emerged inside me. Not despair, not grief, strategy. I slipped the tube into my pocket and walked back inside. The kitchen clock ticked steady, mocking me with its ordinariness. I should have screamed, maybe smashed a plate, maybe confronted him with the evidence. But what good were theatrics when he'd already rehearsed his lies? No, I wouldn't give him that power. I would wait, gather, and strike in a way he'd never see coming. The next morning, I stood in the hardware aisle at Home Depot, the fluorescent lights humming above me. Rows of adhesives gleamed on the shelves, promising permanence. My hand hovered before I picked up a tube of industrial-strength glue. Permanent Bond, the label read. A chill slid through me, but I smiled. It felt poetic. If he wanted to cling to someone else, I'd make sure he clung harder than he ever imagined. Of course, I knew I needed more than vengeance. I needed cover. That's where Doris came in. I called her up casual as could be and suggested brunch and pedicures that weekend. She was delighted, happy for a girl's day. She had no idea she was becoming the perfect alibi. By the time Vincent's truck pulled out of the driveway Saturday morning, humming that smug little tune he always did, I was already with his mother sipping mimosas in Old Town Scottsdale. Back home, though, before that outing, I had carried out the quietest, most deliberate act of my life. In the stillness of my kitchen, I emptied the tube of lubricant with a syringe, my hand steady as though I'd done it 100 times before. Then I refilled it with glue, thick and unforgiving pressing, until the tube looked untouched. I wiped it clean, slid it back under his driver's seat, and exhaled. A trap set silent and certain. That afternoon, as Doris chatted about her late husband's wandering eye, I nodded, smiled, and sipped my drink. Inside, my nerves buzzed like live wires. Would it work? Would fate intervene? Or would I be left with nothing but guilt and a half-baked plan? Hours later, my phone buzzed. A neighborhood app notification emergency vehicles on our street. My pulse spiked. Fire trucks, paramedics, chaos just a few doors down. I kept my expression calm, even playful, as I showed Doris another antique bracelet in the shop window. Inside, though, I knew. The moment had come. The trap had sprung. The turning point wasn't just discovering that tube under his seat. It was realizing I didn't need to wait for him to confess. I didn't need his permission to claim justice. From that day forward, I wasn't the betrayed wife anymore. I was the architect of his downfall, and the best part, he would never see it coming. The next few days felt like watching a slow-motion replay of my own life. Only now I could see the frames that had always been there, but I'd refused to watch. The neighborhood hummed on mail trucks, kids on bikes, the scrape of a landscaper's rake. But under that ordinary soundtrack was the aftershock of whatever had happened down the block. People texted each other clips and headlines. Memes bloomed. I scrolled only enough to know the shape of it. Emergency crews, a caption that made my lips twitch because it fit too neatly into the kind of humiliation I'd imagined. I told myself I wouldn't relish it, but I felt the small, cold pleasure of the tide turning. When Vincent came home that night, he looked like a man who'd been stripped of his armor. His clothes were different. He moved slow as if his limbs remembered a fight they hadn't yet finished. He didn't hum. He didn't smell like cologne. He smelled faintly of bleach and hospital antiseptic, like a sanitizing attempt to scrub shame away. He tried to be casual, but casualness is its own accusation when guilt sits heavy in your chest. "How was your day?" I asked, pouring 2 cups of coffee, because habit is a neat little anchor. My hands were steady. My voice was steady. If I'd been honest, my hands would have been shaking, but I had learned over years of HR meetings that composure makes people underestimate you. "Complicated," he said, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a man bargaining with a truth he'd rather not tell. Had to deal with some, equipment issues. Clients freaked out. You know how it goes. Equipment issues. I repeated the phrase like a talisman. It fit the viral clips, the fire trucks, the embarrassed comments, but it also fit him his capacity to reduce moral failure to an operational glitch. He took a sip of his coffee, then set the mug down as if afraid it might splash and stain the kitchen the way his choices had stained our life. The morning after the news went viral, Sundale Fitness called. I heard it before I saw his face. Vincent's voice on the phone clipped small. He hung up and sat down at the table like a man who'd been told he'd lost something he couldn't afford to lose. I watched the color drain from him, and something inside me loosened in a way that felt like release. Word spread fast in tight communities. Some people called it poetic justice. Some called it karma. Some called it a lesson he'd earned the hard way. My neighbors whispered at barbecues. A few texted to say, "I didn't deserve that," then added the customary, "I'm here if you need anything." The problem with being the betrayed is that people want to be helpful, but their help is the kind that adds salt-offering blankets when what you want is fire or vice versa. But while the world had its opinions, my mind had its agenda. I'd spent enough nights tweaking policies and auditing benefit claims to know the value of a solid paper trail. Revenge had its moment of satisfaction, but it didn't change the fact that Vincent had steered our finances and memory into dangerous waters. There were questions to answer. Had he been siphoning money? Had family funds been touched? Where did loyalty end and exploitation begin? I started collecting. Not in the way I had with glue and syringe, but with subpoenas and receipts with copies and notarized statements. I made discreet phone calls to the bank just enough to set wheels in motion. I asked for transaction histories under the guise of routine concern for our joint accounts. I requested a copy of any beneficiaries named on retirement documents. I pulled up past credit card statements the way a detective pulls thread to see what whole cloth unravels. In the meantime, I arranged a meeting with an elder law attorney I found by the recommendation of a woman at my church who'd once been widowed and wary. Her office smelled of paper and tea, and the kind of warmth that comes from people who have seen others bite and survive. The lawyer, a woman with short hair and eyes that met yours, listened without surprise. "You're not the first woman to be left out of the narrative," she said softly, "but you might be one of the few who's willing to read the footnotes." She explained elder financial abuse in a way that made it suddenly feel like a visible crime rather than a private failing. It wasn't just the perfume and the late nights anymore. It was the pattern, the sudden new accounts, the odd withdrawals, those gifts that kept getting bigger. With each line on the bank statement, she underlined the story of my life, reformed into something I could present in court intent pattern and exploitation. There was a law for this, she said. There was a way to strip privileges and protect assets. There was also, she warned, fallout. Public hearings, depositions, gossip. Justice had teeth, but it also had edges that cut both ways. Still, the decision felt like a doorway I had to walk through. I wanted not just to punish. I wanted to secure Doris's future. I imagined her back porch hoe in hand, tending the geraniums like she always did, safe, fed, dignified. That image steadied me more than the thrill of vengeance ever had. We drafted letters and filed paperwork. We froze accounts where we could. We placed a temporary conservatorship to put a legal buffer between Doris and anyone trying to drain her savings. The motions were clinical, public, and thorough. It felt strange to wield the same procedural power I used at work for the sake of family. The irony that my career prepared me for this moment was not lost on me. Where once I'd mediated staff disputes and negotiated severance, I was now negotiating the terms of a family's integrity. Vincent read about the filings in his inbox and then on his phone. His reaction was not fury as I expected it to be. It was fear, slow, slithering, unavoidable. Men like him are used to controlling narratives. They can charm a room because they have never had to watch their hands tremble while someone else signs their life away. He came at me one night pleading and angry, his voice raw in a way that reminded me how close pain and regret can sometimes be. "Elena, please. We can fix this. I can make it right. Make it right." I echoed, cold and precise. "You want to make it right after months of lies. You think money is how we fix the rest of it." My voice was quieter than his, but it landed heavier. He said the things cheaters always say, that it had been a mistake, that it wasn't about me, that he deserved forgiveness. He said he loved me in a flurry of sentences that aimed like arrows for the part of me that still remembered the man who had once dragged furniture into our first apartment as if it were a treasure. I let his words wash over me, cataloging them the way I had cataloged his late nights. I was done being the person who believed explanations without evidence. Court papers don't heal a broken heart, but they do create edges. They drew lines in our life where none had been visible before. The filings forced him into conversations with his mother that were awkward and honest, the kind of truth that burns. Doris sat through one of our meetings and looked at Vincent as if she'd just learned a fact about the weather, surprised but not surprised enough to fight. "You did this," she said to him once, not loud, not mean, simply factual. "You made choices. People will tell you that the public humiliation would be enough. For some it is. For me, it was only the beginning." The legal machinery took weeks to engage, fully nights of prepping documents and gathering witnesses, afternoons sitting with Doris as she counted her pills and joked about shows she missed. I learned in quiet ways how resilience is built not with fireworks, but with the slow, steady stacking of small protections. I learned that retaliation felt empty unless paired with the safety of the person you loved. The collapse was not a single event. It was a collapse in layers: his job, his reputation, the small assumptions neighbors made about what kind of man he was. As each layer came down, I watched not with glee, but with a heavy, measured relief. There was a cost, and I was willing to pay it. The most important thing was that Doris could now walk without checking to see who was behind her. The day the conservatorship hearing was scheduled, I drove Doris to the courthouse. She held my hand and hummed an old song she liked. Her eyes were brighter than they had been in months. I thought about the woman I'd become, not the quiet baker wiping the counter, but someone who'd learned how to hold power with gentleness. The trial would expose us, make us small on a public stage. But sometimes, truth needs the lights to be seen. When the hearing began, the room smelled of coffee and paper, and something that felt like possibility. I sat beside Doris, my fingers linked with hers, and for the first time since finding that tube under his seat, I felt like I was moving towards something that mattered more than revenge. I had replaced humiliation with protection, and the two felt very different. The day Vincent returned from his so-called trip was the day everything I had been planning came to the surface. I still remember the smell of the airport coffee brewing at the newsstand floor, polish the faint jet fuel drifting in each time the sliding doors opened. My chest tightened as I stood by the arrival gate. Doris's hand looped through my arm. She insisted on coming, though I had warned her it might be ugly. She wanted to see, she said. She wanted to watch the son she raised face the consequences he thought he was too clever to outrun. When Vincent came down the ramp, he looked older than I had ever seen him. His face was drawn, the confidence drained out of him like air from a balloon. His hair, once carefully groomed, stuck in tufts, and his shirt was wrinkled. Kylie trailed behind him, sunglasses covering half her face, pulling her suitcase like it weighed more than her 23 years of self-delusion. For a moment, a petty part of me marveled at how quickly glamour decays when it's bathed in shame. I stepped forward. My lawyer, Claire, a sharp-eyed woman in a navy suit, flanked me like a bodyguard. She carried the envelope thick with documents that might as well have been bricks. Vincent's eyes flickered from me to Doris to Claire, and his mouth opened as if to form a greeting, but no word came out. Vincent Carter, Claire's voice was crisp, professional, cutting through the murmur of passengers around us. "You've been served." She handed him the summons, and for a moment his hands didn't move. Then reluctantly he took it, his knuckles whitening as he realized what it meant. I saw the twitch in his jaw, the way he clenched his teeth like he wanted to grind the paper to dust. Kylie tilted her head, confused. "What's that?" she asked, her voice brittle. "Nothing you need to worry about," Vincent muttered, but his face betrayed him. "Actually," I said, stepping closer so only they could hear, "it's everything you need to worry about. Financial exploitation, elder abuse, fraud. Words you probably thought I'd never use. But here we are." His eyes widened, a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Elena, come on. Not here." His voice dropped to a whisper, pleading. "We can talk at home." "There is no home," I replied evenly. "Not for you, not anymore." The words hit him harder than the summons. For a moment he looked like he might reach for me, like old reflexes could save him. But Doris's voice cut through before he could move. "Don't touch her." Vincent froze, his eyes snapping to his mother. Doris stood straighter than I'd ever seen her frame, small, but her presence towering. Her voice carried years of patience, disappointment, and finally judgment. "I told you once, Vincent, you make choices, and choices have prices." The crowd around us began to notice. People slowed their pace, eyes darting to the scene. A man in a ball cap muttered, "Damn, that's cold." Someone else whispered, "Isn't that the trainer from Sundale, saw him online?" The hum of gossip swirled like static closing in. Vincent's shoulders hunched, his head bowing under the invisible weight. "Elena," he tried again. "You don't understand. He jerked his chin toward Kylie. "She made me feel alive again. You and I, we were distant, and I stop." I cut in my voice sharp enough to make him flinch. "Don't you dare stand here and rewrite history like you're the victim. You lied, you stole, you humiliated the people who trusted you most, and now you're going to answer for it." Kylie's sunglasses slid down just enough for me to see her eyes flick nervously between us. She shifted her weight, the arrogance drained from her face. "I didn't know it was like this," she mumbled, clutching her suitcase tighter. "I thought you thought wrong," Doris snapped, surprising me with her fire. "You thought you could take my son's lies and build something out of them, but lies don't hold." The TSA agent nearby cleared his throat, watching carefully as if he expected the situation to erupt into something more physical. Claire gave a reassuring nod, her hand lightly on my elbow, reminding me to let the paperwork do its work. But I wanted Vincent to hear me here in front of everyone. "You always thought I was too quiet, too boring to fight back." I said, my voice steady but rising enough for those nearby to catch. "But the thing about quiet people, Vincent, is that we watch, we notice, and when we finally act, we don't miss." The murmurs around us grew louder, passengers openly staring now. Vincent's face flushed crimson sweat, dotting his forehead. His bravado was gone, replaced by panic, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. "You've ruined me," he spat, finally the venom back in his voice. "You've destroyed everything." "No," I corrected calmly. "You destroyed everything the moment you chose yourself over your family. I just pulled back the curtain so everyone could see it." Kylie tugged at his arm, whispering frantically, "Let's just go, Vincent!" But he stood rooted, the papers in his hand trembling. Claire stepped in, her tone cutting like a scalpel. "You are required to appear in court on the date specified. Any attempt to tamper with funds or intimidate witnesses will result in immediate legal action. I suggest you use the time to find representation." With that, she turned to me, signaling that our work here was done. But I lingered just long enough to let silence hang heavy between us. "Enjoy your freedom while it lasts," I whispered, my words meant for him alone. "Because soon the only thing you'll have left are the consequences." As Doris and I walked away, her arm linked with mine, I felt the collective gaze of strangers on our backs. Whispers trailed behind us, pity mixing with admiration. My heart pounded, but not from fear, from release. Years of doubt, humiliation, and betrayal had crystallized into a single moment of clarity. Back at the curb, as we waited for the car, Doris squeezed my hand. "You did it," she said softly. "You gave him what he deserved." I nodded, watching taxis pull in and out, the Arizona sun glaring against the glass doors. For the first time in years, I felt taller, lighter. The power that had been drained from me by his lies had returned, reshaped into something sharper, something I could hold. Behind us, I knew Vincent was still standing there, clutching papers that spelled the end of his illusions. And for once, it wasn't my burden to carry. It was his. The courthouse smelled of paper, old carpet, and the faint sting of disinfectant. I sat beside Doris at the long wooden table, the judge's gavel tapping the room into order. Vincent sat across from us, his suit ill-fitted, his hair tamed too neatly, as if dressing respectably could erase the months of lies now lined up against him. His lawyer shuffled papers, whispered strategies, but the weight of evidence spoke louder than any defense ever could. Bank statements, social media posts, witness testimonies. Each page was another nail sealing the coffin of his credibility. When the judge read aloud the words, "financial exploitation of a dependent adult," Vincent's eyes finally dropped. For the first time, he looked not angry, not defensive, but hollow. Doris sat straighter, her fingers folded in her lap, the lines on her face etched deeper with relief than with age. She wasn't vindictive. She was tired of pretending her son hadn't crossed lines, tired of hoping he would do better. And yet she squeezed my hand under the table, as if to thank me for carrying a fight she hadn't the strength to wage alone. The ruling came swift. The money Vincent had siphoned under the guise of gifts and joint expenses was ordered returned. Doris's accounts were secured under legal protection, a conservatorship that shielded her from future manipulation. Vincent was removed as a beneficiary in her will, effective immediately. The judge's words rang clear. This court finds evidence of deliberate and sustained exploitation. Consequences are not optional, they are earned. For Vincent, it was the final undoing. His career had already collapsed after the scandal went viral. Now his financial access was severed, his name in legal records stained with abuse. He slumped in his chair, a man who once strutted through gyms and grocery aisles with a grin now reduced to someone the world would cross the street to avoid. Walking out of the courthouse, the desert sun hit me like a cleansing fire. Doris leaned on my arm, her coral-painted nails catching the light. "I can breathe again," she whispered, and I felt the words land in my chest like a benediction. It wasn't just her safety secured, it was her dignity restored. In the weeks that followed, the noise faded. Neighbors found new gossip. The internet moved on to its next scandal. But inside our house, the air felt different, lighter, freer. Doris spent her afternoons clipping roses in her garden, humming tunes she hadn't touched in years. Sometimes she'd call me over just to share tea and laughter, small rituals that tasted sweeter, now that fear no longer shadowed them. As for me, the quiet wasn't suffocating anymore. It was liberating. I realized I had spent too many years shrinking inside Vincent's shadow, tolerating his dismissals, letting him convince me that my instincts were paranoia. No more. I enrolled in evening classes exploring certification programs in elder advocacy and financial protection. If I could protect Doris, I could protect others. I'd found a calling hidden inside betrayal, a way to turn the sharp edges of my pain into tools for someone else's defense. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a notebook full of plans, Doris handed me a photo she'd pulled from an old album. It was of her younger, holding Vincent as a toddler, her eyes hopeful, her smile wide. "I thought he'd be my greatest joy," she said softly. "But sometimes our children break us, and sometimes if we're lucky, someone else steps in to put the pieces back." Her words weren't bitter. They were a quiet acknowledgement of truth. I slipped the photo back into her hand and hugged her shoulders. We didn't need to say more. Justice hadn't come through shouting matches or dramatic confessions. It had come through patience, precision, and a willingness to face the storm without blinking. And in the wreckage, I discovered something more enduring than revenge, the strength to build a life where deceit couldn't breathe. Sometimes at night, when the cicadas buzz and the desert air hangs warm and still, I think about that moment at the airport, the envelope passing from my lawyer's hand to Vincent's. His face frozen, the mask cracking. It plays in my memory like a scene from a film, not because of the drama, but because of the clarity. That was the moment I stopped being a victim and became something else entirely. And every time I think about it, I smile. Not with cruelty, but with certainty. Because in the end, the only thing permanent about Vincent's betrayal was the lesson it left behind: no one gets to steal dignity without paying a price. Betrayal has a way of hollowing you out, of making you believe you're powerless. But if this story taught me anything, it's that silence can be sharper than screams, and patience can be more devastating than rage. I didn't need to beg Vincent for the truth or fight for scraps of his attention. I needed to protect what mattered: my dignity, Doris's security, the part of myself that refused to stay small. Today, I look back and realize love isn't proven by how much pain you endure. Love is measured by protection, by honesty, by the courage to walk away when someone shows you who they really are. Justice doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. It comes in the details, in paperwork, in timing, in the strength to stand your ground when it would be easier to fold. If you're watching this and you've ever been betrayed, know this: you're not alone, and you're not powerless. You may not control what others do, but you can control how you answer. And sometimes the quietest answer is the one that changes everything. If this story struck a chord with you, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe. You don't want to miss the next story.